Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Celebrations Rerouted. Dominic Foster stood in his kitchen, meticulously arranging 40 candles on the elaborate birthday cake he'd picked up from the high-end bakery downtown. His 40th birthday was supposed to be significant, a milestone worthy of celebration after years of grinding through 16-hour workdays to build his cybersecurity firm from nothing. The party had been his wife Adrienne's idea. "You deserve recognition," she'd insisted with that smile that still made his heart skip even after 15 years of marriage. Their modernist home in the hills overlooking Palo Alto was filling with guests, colleagues, friends, and family members who'd flown in specifically for the occasion. Dominic had always been a private person, but tonight he'd agreed to let his guard down. He straightened his custom-tailored jacket and prepared to join the gathering. Russell Hughes, his childhood friend and now COO of Foster Security Solutions, approached with 2 glasses of scotch. "The birthday boy hiding in the kitchen? That's not the Dom I know." Russell handed him a glass. The man who stared down the Ukrainian hackers last year wouldn't be nervous about a little attention. Dominic accepted the drink with a smirk. Different battlefield, different rules of engagement. Russell raised his glass. "To the most strategically brilliant bastard I know. You've earned this night." Their glasses clinked just as Adrienne entered the kitchen, radiant in her burgundy dress that hugged her athletic figure. At 38, she still turned heads wherever she went. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, revealing the diamond earrings Dominic had given her for their anniversary. "There you are," she said, approaching Dominic with a quick kiss. "Everyone's waiting for the man of the hour." Her perfume, jasmine with undertones of vanilla, lingered as she pulled away, her green eyes bright with something Dominic couldn't quite identify. Excitement? Anticipation? "Just finishing the war preparations," Dominic replied, nodding toward the cake. Adrienne laughed and took his hand. Always the tactician. "Come on, General. Your troops await." As they entered the expansive living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the twinkling city below, applause erupted. Dominic nodded appreciatively, uncomfortable with the attention but determined not to show it. He'd learned long ago that perception was everything. People respected strength, stability. He'd built his reputation and his company on that principle. The evening progressed smoothly. Dinner was served, stories were shared, and laughter filled the rooms. Dominic found himself actually enjoying the celebration until the moment Adrienne clinked her glass with a silver spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "To my wonderful husband on his 40th birthday." She turned to face Dominic, her expression softening. "You've always supported my dreams, even when they seemed impossible." Something in her tone made Dominic's internal alarms activate. This wasn't going where he expected. "And now," Adrienne continued, her voice rising with excitement, "I have amazing news to share with everyone. After 3 rounds of interviews and what felt like a lifetime of waiting, I've been accepted into Stanford Law School's prestigious accelerated program." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Dominic maintained his smile, even as he felt something shift beneath his feet. This was the first he'd heard of any law school application, let alone Stanford. His wife of 15 years had kept this completely secret from him. "I couldn't have done it without a special mentor," Adrienne added, gesturing toward a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair whom Dominic had been introduced to earlier as Dean Sullivan, apparently a recent friend of Adrienne's from her volunteer work. "Lawrence has been guiding me through the application process for months." Lawrence Sullivan raised his glass with a practiced smile. "Adrienne's brilliance made my job easy. Stanford Law is gaining an exceptional student." As guests swarmed Adrienne with questions and congratulations, Dominic found himself pushed to the periphery of his own birthday celebration. Someone dimmed the lights, and Russell wheeled in the birthday cake, but few people even noticed. The conversation had completely shifted to Adrienne's achievement and her upcoming academic journey. "When do classes start?" Dominic overheard someone ask. Just 3 weeks, Adrian replied excitedly. I'll be practically living in a library until then, trying to get ahead. 3 weeks. The time frame hit Dominic like a physical blow. They had a trip to Bora Bora planned in 2 weeks, a surprise he'd been arranging for months. As the evening wore on, Dominic found himself mechanically going through the motions, cutting the cake that few people actually ate, accepting belated birthday wishes that seemed like afterthoughts, and watching as his wife glowed under the attention she was receiving. Dean Sullivan remained close to her side, his hand occasionally touching her elbow or lower back in ways that struck Dominic as unnecessarily familiar. By midnight, most guests had departed, leaving behind empty glasses, scattered plates, and cake frosting ground into the imported Italian marble floor. Adrian was still energetically chatting with her closest friends in the living room, while Dominic silently cleaned the kitchen. Need help? Russell asked, rolling up his sleeves. I've got it, Dominic replied evenly, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn spot of frosting. Russell lowered his voice. That was unexpected. Did you know about Stanford? What do you think? Dominic's tone was neutral, but Russell knew him well enough to recognize the controlled anger beneath. For what it's worth, I think it was shitty timing, Russell offered. Dominic simply nodded, continuing to scrub the floor. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Russ. I'll see you at the office on Monday. After everyone left, Dominic finished cleaning while Adrian showered upstairs. He didn't confront her that night. He didn't argue or demand explanations. Instead, he stored the leftover food, wiped down every surface, and packed away the barely touched birthday gifts. Then he made himself a final drink and stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, his mind working with the cold that had made him successful. By the time he finally went upstairs, Adrienne was already asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the bedside lamp she'd left on for him. Dominic turned it off and lay in the darkness, wide awake, thinking about the months of secret applications, interviews, and meetings with Dean Sullivan that his wife had never mentioned. Something fundamental had shifted, and as Dominic finally drifted towards sleep in the early hours of the morning, one thought crystallized in his mind. Nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. Morning Revelations. Dominic woke at precisely 5:30 a.m., as he did every morning regardless of the day's events. The space beside him was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. Adrienne had always been a late sleeper, especially on weekends. Her early absence was unusual. He found her in the home office, already dressed in yoga pants and a fitted tank top, surrounded by papers and frantically typing on her laptop. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, offering a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning. I made coffee," she said, gesturing toward a mug on the desk that was clearly her own. "Sorry about the mess. I'm trying to get organized for school. There's so much preliminary reading." Dominic leaned against the doorframe, studying his wife with newfound detachment. "Stanford Law. That's quite an achievement." "I know. I still can't believe it myself," Adrienne replied, her focus returning to the screen. "Lawrence says the accelerated program is brutal, but he thinks I have what it takes." "Lawrence," Dominic repeated flatly. "You two seem close." Adrienne's fingers paused over the keyboard momentarily before resuming their rhythm. "He's been an incredible mentor. Without him, I don't think I would have had a chance at admission. Strange that in 15 years of marriage, you never mentioned wanting to be a lawyer." She finally looked up at him, her expression a mixture of defiance and what might have been guilt. "People change, Dom. You've been so focused on the company. I needed something for myself. And you didn't think to discuss a life-altering decision with your husband? I wanted to be sure before I told you. I didn't want to disappoint you if it didn't work out." She stood up, approaching him with a placating smile. "Besides, I wanted it to be a surprise. Something positive to share on your birthday." The calculated timing of her announcement suddenly seemed even more manipulative. Dominic remained expressionless. "We have plans. Bora Bora. 2 weeks from now." Adrienne's face fell. "Oh God, I completely forgot about that." With everything happening, she touched his arm. "Can we postpone? Maybe winter break? I promise I'll make it up to you." Without responding, Dominic turned and walked to the kitchen to make his own coffee. His mind was unusually quiet, the storm of emotions contained behind the disciplined facade he perfected over decades. While the coffee brewed, he opened his laptop at the kitchen counter and began a search for Lawrence Sullivan. The man was indeed a dean at Stanford Law, assistant dean of admissions, to be precise. Distinguished career, impeccable credentials, divorced 3 years ago. Numerous scholarly articles and speaking engagements. Photos showed him at various university functions, always impeccably dressed, always commanding attention. Dominic then opened his personal financial management software. Something had been nagging at him since waking, a half-formed suspicion that demanded investigation. He reviewed the joint account transaction for the past 6 months, noting several unexplained withdrawals and charges to restaurants he and Adrian had never visited together, a hotel in Napa Valley, and a jewelry store in San Francisco. Closing the laptop, Dominic sipped his coffee and considered his next move that had helped him build his company. Confronting Adrian with suspicions alone would be ineffective. He needed concrete evidence, the kind that left no room for denial or explanations. He pulled out his phone and texted Russell, "Need a favor. Discreet. Office. 1 p.m. The reply came almost immediately. "I'll be there." When Dominic returned to the office doorway with 2 fresh cups of coffee, Adrian was on the phone, her voice lowered. She quickly ended the call when she noticed him. "Just Lawrence," she explained without being asked. "He's helping me arrange my class schedule." Dominic handed her the coffee. "On a Saturday morning?" "He's dedicated," Adrian replied, accepting the cup with a smile that seemed forced. "Thank you for this. And I'm sorry about last night. I know it was your birthday, and I kind of hijacked it." "It's fine," he said, his tone neutral. "I have some work to catch up on at the office. Security upgrade for a new client. I'll probably be gone most of the day." Relief visibly washed over Adrian's features. "That's actually perfect. I was thinking of meeting some friend for lunch to celebrate the Stanford news, and then I might visit campus to get oriented." "Sounds productive," Dominic replied. "Don't wait up for me tonight. This project might run late." After showering and dressing in casual weekend attire, a departure from his usual tailored suits, Dominic left in his Tesla, deliberately leaving his primary phone on the bedroom charger. The secondary phone in his pocket, untraceable and unknown to Adrian, would serve his purposes better today. At precisely 1 p.m., Dominic sat across from Russell in his office at Foster Security Solutions. The weekend left the building empty except for the security personnel at the front desk. "What's going on, Dom?" Russell asked, concern evident in his voice. "You look like you did before we took down the Belarusian operation." "I need surveillance equipment," Dominic stated without preamble. "The best we have, and I need it kept off the books." Russell leaned forward. "Are we talking about a client?" "We're talking about my wife," Dominic replied coldly. "And Dean Lawrence Sullivan." Understanding dawned on Russell's face. "You think she's—" "I don't speculate without data," Dominic cut him off. "That's why I need the equipment." Russell nodded slowly. The new Phantom series just came in. Undetectable, remote access, military-grade encryption. He hesitated. "Dom, are you sure about this? Once you go down this road." "The road already exists whether I walk it or not," Dominic replied. "I'm just illuminating what's been hidden." 2 hours later, Dominic left with a briefcase containing nearly invisible cameras, sophisticated audio devices, GPS trackers, and software that would give him access to every digital communication on devices connected to his home network. By the time Adrian returned home that evening, the house had been transformed into an invisible web of surveillance. Cameras monitored key areas, software had been installed on their shared devices, and Dominic had gained access to her location data, text messages, and emails. He watched from his downtown hotel room as Adrian moved through their house on his laptop screen. She made several phone calls, all to the same number. Dominic recorded each conversation, his expression unchanging as his suspicions were confirmed one by one. He didn't suspect anything, Adrian said into her phone, her voice clear through his high-tech equipment. "I feel terrible about the Bora Bora trip, though." A male voice, unmistakably Dean Sullivan's, responded, "It's better this way, Addie. Clean break once you're officially enrolled. The faculty housing I arranged for you is nearly ready. What if he fights the divorce?" Adrian asked, her voice smaller now. He won't once we present the terms. Your lawyer has everything prepared. Remember, with what we have, he'll want this to be quick and quiet. Dominic's face remained impassive as he listened to them discuss assets, timelines, and strategies. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed any emotion. When Adrian finally went to bed, Dominic continued monitoring other feeds, systematically building a comprehensive picture of his wife's betrayal. He accessed her cloud storage and discovered hundreds of messages, photos, and videos documenting an affair that had apparently been ongoing for nearly a year. Most damning was a folder labeled Leverage containing documents related to his company, some of which contained proprietary information that could destroy everything he'd built if it fell into competitors' hands. As dawn approached, Dominic closed his laptop. His face reflected in the hotel window showed no anger, no hurt, only a cold, calculated resolve. The man who had protected digital fortresses from the most sophisticated hackers in the world had just discovered that the greatest security breach had occurred in his own home, by the person he had trusted most. He wouldn't respond with emotion. Emotion was inefficient, messy. Instead, he would respond with strategy, meticulous, patient, and devastating. Chapter 3. Roots of Deception. Sunday morning found Dominic establishing his command center in a secure room at his company headquarters, a space originally designed for sensitive client projects requiring complete isolation. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now using it to investigate his own wife. He created a detailed timeline of Adrienne's affair with Lawrence Sullivan. Their first meeting had occurred at a charity fundraiser for educational opportunities, an event Dominic had been too busy to attend. Initial texts were professional, gradually becoming personal, then intimate. Weekend workshops that were actually romantic getaways. Late-night study sessions at Sullivan's Palo Alto home. What disturbed Dominic most wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the calculated nature of the deception. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment or a confused heart. This was strategic. Adrian had been systematically copying sensitive information about Foster Security Solutions for months, storing it in encrypted files that she shared with Sullivan. By midday, Dominic had uncovered the full scope of their plan. Sullivan had arranged Adrienne's admission to Stanford as a pretext for her to leave the marriage while maximizing her claim to Dominic's assets. The Leverage folder contained information that, if exposed, could potentially trigger federal investigations into some of Foster Security's more aggressive counter-hacking methodologies. Methods that operated in legal gray areas but had been necessary to protect their highest-profile clients. Dominic leaned back in his chair, absorbing this information without visibly reacting. Then he reached for his phone and made a call. "Patricia? It's Dominic Foster. I need to see you immediately. It's an emergency." Patricia Windsor had been Dominic's personal attorney since before he founded his company. At 62, she was a legal shark who had never lost a case and who valued loyalty above all else. Her weekend home in Woodside was only 30 minutes away. When Dominic arrived, Patricia was waiting in her home office, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her penetrating blue eyes missing nothing as she evaluated his composed demeanor. "You look too calm for a man who called with an emergency," she observed, gesturing for him to sit. "The facade of calm is often necessary in crisis," Dominic replied, taking a seat across from her enormous antique desk. For the next hour, Dominic presented the evidence he had gathered, speaking with clinical detachment, as if discussing a security breach at a client's company rather than the implosion of his marriage. Patricia listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When he finished, she removed her reading glasses and fixed him with a shrewd gaze. "They've underestimated you," she said finally. "A common mistake your adversaries make, as I recall from our previous legal battles." "They have," Dominic agreed, "and I intend to leverage that miscalculation." "Divorce proceedings are different from corporate warfare, Dominic. There are different rules of engagement. Rules can be reinterpreted when necessary." Patricia's expression sharpened. "What exactly are you planning? As your attorney, I need to know the boundaries." "I'm planning to dismantle their entire strategy piece by piece," Dominic replied. "Not just to protect myself, but to ensure they understand the consequences of their actions." Revenge, then. Justice, Dominic corrected, with appropriate penalties for the offense. Patricia studied him for a long moment. Sullivan has significant influence at Stanford and throughout the legal community. Adrian clearly has compromising information about your company. This won't be a clean fight. I'm not interested in clean, Dominic said, his voice taking on an edge for the first time. I'm interested in complete. Then we need to work quickly. If they're planning to blindside you with divorce papers and threats of exposure, we need to preempt them. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. First, we secure your assets and intellectual property. Then, we gather additional intelligence on Sullivan. Everyone has vulnerabilities. We just need to find his. Dominic nodded. I've already begun that process. Sullivan's career appears impeccable on the surface, but there are inconsistencies in his history that warrant deeper investigation. Good. Meanwhile, I'll prepare defensive legal strategies and draft counter-allegations. Patricia hesitated. Dominic, I've known you for a long time. This kind of betrayal, it affects even the most disciplined minds. Are you certain you can maintain the necessary objectivity? For a brief moment, something dark flashed in Dominic's eyes. A glimpse of the rage and hurt carefully contained beneath his controlled exterior. This isn't my first betrayal, Patricia, he said quietly. You remember why I left my previous firm? Patricia nodded. Dominic had been forced out of a prominent tech security company early in his career after his innovations were stolen by his mentor and presented as the mentor's own work. Rather than accepting a settlement and signing a non-disclosure agreement, Dominic had systematically exposed the mentor's entire history of intellectual theft, resulting in the man's disgrace and the company's eventual collapse. I remember, Patricia acknowledged. Vincent Miller never recovered professionally. Or personally, Dominic added without emotion. Betrayal has consequences. As Dominic drove back to his hotel, he reviewed his conversation with Patricia while simultaneously planning his next moves. He needed to understand the full extent of what he was facing, and that required learning more about Lawrence Sullivan's background. The official biography listed on Stanford's website painted the picture of academic excellence and steady career progression. Born in Massachusetts to educated parents, Phillips Exeter Academy, Yale undergraduate, Harvard Law, clerkship with a federal judge, private practice at a prestigious firm, then transitioned to academia. Distinguished papers, speaking engagements, advisory positions. A seemingly flawless professional trajectory. But Dominic hadn't built his cybersecurity empire by accepting surface narratives. Everyone had secrets, areas of vulnerability that could be exploited when necessary. Sullivan would be no exception. Back in his hotel room, Dominic initiated a comprehensive background investigation using resources that weren't available to the general public. His company had developed sophisticated tools for vetting potential employees and identifying security risks. Now he would turn those tools on the man who had conspired to destroy his life. Hours into his research, Dominic discovered the first significant anomaly. Lawrence Sullivan had changed his name at age 22 from Lawrence Silverman. Further digging revealed sealed juvenile records in Massachusetts and a mysterious 2-year gap in his history before he emerged at Yale. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point, a loose thread that, when pulled, might unravel Sullivan's carefully constructed image. Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from Adrian, working late with study group. Don't wait up. Everything okay at the office? He stared at the message, knowing from his surveillance that she was actually at Sullivan's home. For a moment, his finger hovered over the reply button. Then he set the phone aside without responding and returned to his investigation. By Monday morning, Dominic had compiled a preliminary dossier on Lawrence Sullivan that revealed several potential vulnerabilities, questionable financial transactions, inconsistencies in his academic record, and connections to individuals with dubious reputations. None of it was definitively damaging on its own, but collectively, it suggested that Sullivan's pristine reputation might be as carefully constructed as it was fragile. Adrian called him 3 times that morning. Each time, Dominic let it go to voicemail. She was growing concerned about his unusual silence, exactly as he intended. Uncertainty would make her nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. When he finally returned to their home Monday evening, Adrian was waiting in the living room, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been worried sick. You didn't come home last night. You didn't answer my texts." The client's security situation was more complex than anticipated, Dominic replied calmly, setting down his briefcase. "I stayed at a hotel near the office to maximize work time." Adrian studied his face, searching for signs of suspicion or anger. Finding none, she visibly relaxed. "You could have let me know. You're right. That was inconsiderate." He moved toward the stairs. "I need a shower. It's been a long couple of days." "Dom," Adrian called after him. "We should talk about the Stanford situation. About our future." Dominic paused on the stairs, his back to her. "Yes, we should. But not tonight. I have an early meeting tomorrow with a potential investor from Tokyo." "Tomorrow then," Adrian agreed, relief evident in her voice. She clearly believed she still controlled the timing of their confrontation. Upstairs in their bathroom, Dominic stood under the shower's hot spray, eyes closed, mentally reviewing the information he had gathered and the strategy he was developing. His face remained impassive, but his mind was working with cold, relentless precision. Adrian and Sullivan believed they held leverage over him. They expected him to be blindsided, desperate, willing to surrender assets and dignity to avoid exposure. They had miscalculated severely. As Dominic prepared for bed, he heard Adrian on the phone in her study, her voice too low to make out the words without technological assistance. He didn't need to listen. He already knew she was updating Sullivan, reassuring him that Dominic suspected nothing, that their plan remained on track. Let them believe that, Dominic thought as he lay in the darkness beside his sleeping wife. Let them believe they were the predators until the moment they realized they were the prey. Chapter 4. Countermeasures. Tuesday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of domestic routine. Coffee brewing, shower running, the rustle of clothes being selected for the day. Dominic moved through these motions while his mind operated on multiple strategic levels. Adrian seemed particularly attentive, preparing his favorite breakfast and inquiring about his schedule with unusual interest. Her behavior confirmed what Dominic already knew. She was setting the stage for their talk later that day. "I'll try to be home by 7, Dominic told her as he prepared to leave. "We can have that discussion then." "Perfect," Adrian replied, reaching out to straighten his tie unnecessarily. "I'll make dinner. Just the two of us." The gentle manipulation in her actions, the calculated intimacy, the performance of wifely devotion, might have gone unnoticed before. Now it registered as tactical, each gesture designed to lower his defenses before the attack. Dominic arrived at Foster Security's headquarters and immediately summoned his executive team to the main conference room. Russell Hughes was already there, his expression grave. "Everyone here has signed enhanced confidentiality agreements, correct?" Dominic asked as the door closed behind the last arrival. Heads nodded around the table. "Good, because what I'm about to share cannot leave this room." Dominic activated the room's security protocols, jamming all potential listening devices and ensuring the conversation would remain private. Foster Security is facing a coordinated attack targeting our proprietary methodologies and client information. A tense silence fell over the room. "The attack vector is unusual," Dominic continued. "It's coming through my personal life." Without emotion, he outlined the situation with Adrian and Sullivan, presenting it as a security breach rather than a personal betrayal. "Jesus, Dom," breathed Eliza Morgan, their chief legal officer. "Have you confronted them?" "That would be premature," Dominic replied. "Currently, they believe their operation remains undetected, which gives us a tactical advantage." For the next hour, they developed a comprehensive counter-strategy. Mason Reeves, their chief technology officer, would lead a team in securing all sensitive systems and implementing digital tripwires to monitor any attempted access or data extraction. Eliza would work with Patricia Windsor to prepare legal countermeasures. Russell would discreetly relocate key physical assets to secure locations. "What about the personal angle?" Russell asked when the technical aspects had been addressed. "How are you handling that?" "That's my responsibility," Dominic answered. I'll manage the direct engagement with the hostile actors. The clinical terminology wasn't lost on his team, who exchanged concerned glances. Dom, Eliza said carefully, this isn't just a security incident. This is your wife. Was my wife, Dominic corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. Now, she's a security liability being managed accordingly. After the meeting, Dominic retreated to his office where Patricia Windsor was waiting, sleek leather portfolio in hand. I've completed the preliminary investigation into Sullivan's background, she reported. Your instincts were correct. The name change was just the beginning. Patricia laid out a series of documents revealing that Lawrence Silverman had been involved in a serious scandal at his Massachusetts prep school, something involving a female teacher that had been carefully buried through family connections and financial arrangements. His father was a federal judge, Patricia explained. Pulled strings to have the record sealed, facilitated the name change, and smoothed the path to Yale. But the pattern continued. There have been at least 3 settlements with female students or junior colleagues over the years. All hushed up, all paid through an offshore account traced back to a foundation his father established. A predator hiding behind academic prestige, Dominic observed dispassionately. Precisely. And Adrian may not be the first faculty wife he's targeted. I found references to a similar situation at Princeton 5 years ago. Patricia hesitated. There's something else. Sullivan appears to be living well beyond his means. The beachfront property in Malibu, the vacation home in Aspen, the collection of rare books valued at over $4 million. None of it aligns with his academic salary. Source of funds. Still tracing that. But I found connections to several wealthy divorcees whose settlements were unusually generous. In each case, Sullivan served as an advisor during their divorces from high-net-worth husbands. He identifies vulnerable women, helps them extract maximum value from their marriages, and takes a cut, Dominic summarized. A divorce consultant operating in academia shadows. That appears to be the pattern, Patricia confirmed. And based on the financial records we've obtained, he's been extraordinarily successful. Dominic absorbed this information, adding it to his mental strategy map. This changes our approach. Sullivan isn't just helping Adrian leave me. He's running a sophisticated operation, and I'm the latest target. There's one more thing, Patricia added. Sullivan's position at Stanford may be in jeopardy. There are rumors of another inappropriate relationship with a graduate student. Nothing concrete yet, but the university has quietly formed a committee to investigate. Perfect timing, Dominic mused. He needs a significant financial infusion and a distraction from the investigation. I'm meant to provide both. Patricia watched him carefully. What are you planning, Dominic? A strategic reversal, he replied. They've been setting a trap for me. I'm going to redirect it back to them. By late afternoon, Dominic had refined his counter-strategy. The first phase involved digital manipulation, subtle alterations to the leverage files Adrian had collected, introducing plausible yet fundamentally incorrect information that would undermine any attempt to use them against him. The second phase targeted Sullivan directly. Dominic activated a network of private investigators to document Sullivan's pattern of behavior with vulnerable women and trace the mysterious source of his wealth. Simultaneously, an anonymous tip with carefully selected evidence was sent to the Stanford committee investigating Sullivan's conduct. For the final phase, Dominic contacted Victor Zhao, a former client whose technology company had recently been acquired for billions. Victor owed Dominic a significant favor after Foster Security had thwarted a devastating hack attempt just before the acquisition deal closed. I need you to approach Lawrence Sullivan, Dominic explained over a secure line. Express interest in establishing a scholarship fund with a substantial endowment. Mention that you're considering several universities, but that Stanford is at the top of your list. And what exactly am I evaluating him for? Victor asked. His susceptibility to financial temptation, Dominic replied. The higher the amount, the better. I need to know how far he's willing to go for the right price. At precisely 7 p.m., Dominic arrived home to find Adrian waiting with a carefully prepared dinner, wine already poured. She had changed into a dress he had once complimented, her hair and makeup refreshed. The stage was set for what she believed would be her strategic reveal. "This looks wonderful," Dominic commented, taking his seat at the dining table. "I wanted tonight to be special," Adrian replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We have important things to discuss." "Yes, we do," Dominic agreed, taking a sip of wine. "But first, I'd like to propose a toast. To new beginnings." Confusion flickered across Adrienne's face, quickly replaced by cautious optimism. "To new beginnings," she echoed, touching her glass to his. "You know," Dominic continued conversationally, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since your Stanford announcement. About change, about growth, about trust." Adrienne set down her fork. "Di, please," he interrupted gently. "Let me finish. I realized something important." He paused, holding her gaze. "Nothing is ever quite what it appears to be. Wouldn't you agree, Adrienne? Or do you prefer Addie now? That's what Lawrence calls you, isn't it?" The color drained from Adrienne's face. "What are you talking about?" With deliberate calm, Dominic removed his phone from his pocket, placed it on the table, and played an audio recording of Adrienne and Sullivan discussing their plans for the divorce. "You've been busy," Dominic observed as Adrienne's expression shifted from shock to fear. "Law school applications, affair management, corporate espionage, quite the ambitious schedule." "Dom, I can explain." "No need." He cut her off, his voice remaining eerily calm. "Your explanation is already documented in considerable detail. The only question that remains is what happens next." Adrienne's shock was quickly replaced by calculation, a rapid assessment of options and leverage points. "Those files I gathered," she said, her voice steadying. "They could create serious problems for you. For the company." "You mean these files?" Dominic opened his laptop and displayed the folder she had compiled. "Interesting reading. Though I'm afraid some of the more sensitive information may have been corrupted. Digital storage can be so unreliable." Understanding dawned in Adrienne's eyes. "You've altered them." "I've corrected them," Dominic countered. "The original information was inaccurate." "It doesn't matter," Adrienne replied, regaining some confidence. "Lawrence has connections throughout the legal community. One way or another, we can make this very difficult for you." "Lawrence Sullivan. Or should I say, Lawrence Silverman." Dominic watched as uncertainty crept back into her expression. "Did he tell you about his history with female students? The settlements? The sealed records from his youth? Or about the Stanford committee currently investigating his conduct?" Adrienne's composure faltered. "You're making that up." "Am I?" Dominic slid a folder across the table. "Perhaps you should review this before proceeding with your plans. It makes for enlightening reading about your mentor." As Adrienne flipped through the documents, her face registered increasing distress. "This can't be right. He would have told me. The same way you told me about your law school applications." Dominic stood up. "I'll be staying elsewhere for the time being. You have 48 hours to reconsider your position before I proceed with my response to your actions." "What does that mean?" Adrienne demanded, a note of panic entering her voice. "It means you have a choice to make," Dominic replied, moving toward the door. "The consequences of that choice will be proportional to the decisions you've already made. You can't just walk away from 15 years of marriage." Dominic paused at the doorway. "I'm not walking away from our marriage, Adrienne. You ended at the moment you began working with Sullivan to destroy me." His voice remained calm, but his eyes had turned to ice. "I'm simply ensuring appropriate accountability for that decision." As he left the house, Dominic knew Adrienne would immediately contact Sullivan. Their plans were unraveling, and they would be desperate to re-establish control of the situation. That desperation was a vulnerability he intended to exploit. Back in his hotel room, Dominic received a call from Victor Zhao. "Sullivan took the bait," Victor reported. "When I mentioned a potential $20 million endowment, he suggested we discuss it further over dinner at his house. He was particularly interested when I mentioned my recent divorce and the substantial settlement my ex-wife received." "Excellent," Dominic replied. "Accept the dinner invitation. Record everything." Another piece of the counter-strategy was falling into place. Sullivan's pattern of targeting wealthy individuals going through divorces would be documented with irrefutable evidence. The predator was walking directly into Dominic's trap, unaware that the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Dominic's phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and messages from Adrian, all of which he ignored. Let her anxiety build. Let her wonder what he knew and what he planned to do with that knowledge. The first phase of his counter-strategy was complete. Adrian and Sullivan now understood they had lost the element of surprise. The leverage they believed they possessed had been neutralized. Now, they would be forced to react to his initiatives rather than executing their original plan. As Dominic prepared for bed, his phone lit up with a final text from Adrian. "We need to talk. This isn't what you think." He read it without expression, then turned off the phone. The time for talking had passed. Now was the time for action, deliberate, calculated, and uncompromising. Chapter 5, Tactical Advantage. Wednesday morning brought a flurry of activity. Dominic arrived at Foster Security Headquarters before dawn, reviewing surveillance reports that confirmed his predictions. Adrian had spent hours on the phone with Sullivan after Dominic's departure, followed by a late-night meeting at Sullivan's home that had extended until 3 a.m. The security team had made significant progress securing the company's systems and implementing protocols to track any attempted data extraction or unauthorized access. Mason Reeves reported that Adrian had already tried to remotely access several sensitive folders, triggering silent alarms. "She's getting sloppy," Mason observed, using her known devices, not even attempting to mask her IP address. "Desperation erodes caution," Dominic replied. "Continue monitoring. Document everything." By mid-morning, Patricia Windsor arrived with updates on the legal front. "Stanford's investigating committee has received our anonymous tip and expanded their inquiry. 3 former students have already come forward with allegations against Sullivan after being contacted by the committee. And the financial investigation, bearing fruit," Patricia confirmed. "We've traced several large payments from divorce settlements to offshore accounts controlled by Sullivan. In at least 2 cases, the ex-husbands were clients of yours. Men whose cybersecurity systems Sullivan helped compromise through their wives." This new information clarified Sullivan's strategy further. He didn't just target wealthy men for financial gain. He specifically targeted men with valuable intellectual property or sensitive information that could be leveraged during divorce proceedings. He's been using the wives as access points, Dominic realized, getting them to gather information that gives him leverage, then taking a percentage of the inflated settlements. "Exactly," Patricia agreed. "And based on the financial trails, he's accumulated over $30 million through this method in the past decade." "That ends now," Dominic said with quiet intensity. At noon, Dominic received a call from an unknown number. It was Lawrence Sullivan. "Mr. Foster," Sullivan began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of academia. "I think it's time we spoke directly." "I agree," Dominic replied evenly. "Your behavior is causing Adrian considerable distress. She's worried about you." "Is she?" Dominic's tone remained neutral. "That seems inconsistent with her recent activities." A pause. "I understand you're upset. Finding out about Adrian's law school plans this way was unfortunate. But surely we can discuss this like reasonable men." "By all means," Dominic responded. "Shall we discuss your history at Massachusetts prep schools? Your sealed juvenile records? The settlements with female students? Or perhaps your methods of extracting funds from my former clients' divorces?" The silence on the other end of the line extended for several seconds. "I see Adrian was right about your paranoia," Sullivan finally said, his tone shifting to condescension. "These conspiracy theories are concerning, Dominic. Perhaps you should speak with someone professionally." "Gaslighting. An interesting choice." Dominic's voice remained eerily calm. "I prefer evidence, which I have in abundance." "What exactly do you want?" Sullivan demanded, dropping the academic facade. "Meet me today, 5 p.m., the Mariner Club, private dining room. Come alone. And if I refuse?" Then tomorrow morning, the Stanford Investigating Committee receives a comprehensive dossier on Lawrence Silverman's history with vulnerable women. The district attorney receives evidence of financial fraud, and several very powerful ex-husbands learn exactly how their divorces became so unnecessarily expensive. Another pause. "I'll be there." After ending the call, Dominic summoned Russell to his office. "I need you to arrange something at the Mariner Club. 5 p.m. Russell nodded, already understanding from their years of friendship what Dominic was planning. Who will be attending besides Sullivan? Several interested parties, Dominic replied. Men whose wives Sullivan mentored through lucrative divorces. Their attorneys. A representative from Stanford's Ethics Committee. And Victor Zhao, who Sullivan believes is considering a major endowment. A public execution, Russell observed. A necessary demonstration, Dominic corrected. Sullivan operates by isolating his targets. Today, he'll understand what it means to be the isolated one. At 3 p.m., Dominic received a text from Adrian. Lawrence told me about your meeting. I'm coming too. He didn't respond, but made a note to have security admit her. Her presence would add a useful dimension to the encounter. The Mariner Club occupied the top 2 floors of a downtown high-rise, its membership restricted to the Bay Area's most influential figures. The private dining room Dominic had reserved offered panoramic views of the city and bay beyond, the afternoon sun casting everything in golden light as he arrived early to ensure the arrangements were perfect. By 4:45, the other attendees had begun to arrive, 5 distinguished men whose divorces had been unusually costly, each accompanied by their attorney. A severe-looking woman from Stanford's Ethics Committee, and Victor Zhao, who nodded discreetly to Dominic as he entered. At precisely 5 o'clock, Lawrence Sullivan stepped off the elevator, his confident stride faltering slightly as he registered the unexpected assembly. Adrian emerged moments later, her expression shifting from determination to confusion as she surveyed the gathering. "What is this?" Sullivan demanded as Dominic approached. "A convergence of interests," Dominic replied calmly. "People who share a common connection to your professional activities." Sullivan's eyes darted around the room, recognition dawning as he identified several faces. "This is completely inappropriate. Whatever you think you're doing, please," Dominic gestured toward the main table. "Have a seat. We have much to discuss." For the next hour, Dominic presented evidence of Sullivan's pattern of behavior, identifying wealthy men with valuable intellectual property, cultivating relationships with their wives, facilitating divorces while maximizing settlements through leveraged information, and taking substantial payments through offshore accounts. Each piece of evidence was projected onto a large screen, with copies distributed to all attendees. Sullivan's attempts to interrupt or dismiss the allegations were met with cold stares from the assembled group, many of whom were seeing the full picture of how they had been manipulated for the first time. Adrian sat rigid beside Sullivan, her face ashen as the extent of his operation became clear. When Dominic played recordings of Sullivan discussing her case with other women he was mentoring, comparing potential settlement amounts and his expected percentages, she visibly recoiled. "You told me I was special," she whispered to Sullivan, "that this was about us." Sullivan ignored her, his attention fixed on salvaging the situation. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Foster, potentially libelous without proper context." "The context is quite clear," Dominic replied, "and libel requires falsehood. Everything presented here is meticulously documented and verified." He turned to address the room. "Each of you has received a complete file. You're free to pursue individual actions as you see fit. My interest is in ensuring this pattern ends." The Stanford representative spoke up. "Mr. Sullivan, in light of this information, the university will be expanding its investigation. I must ask you to surrender your university credentials and vacate campus housing pending the outcome." Victor Zhao added with calculated timing, "And I believe I'll be directing my endowment elsewhere. Harvard, perhaps." As the meeting concluded, the attendees departed one by one, many stopping to speak quietly with Dominic on their way out. Sullivan sat motionless at the table, his academic persona stripped away, revealing the calculating predator beneath. Adrian approached Dominic as he gathered his materials. "You orchestrated all of this," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and something like reluctant admiration. "You destroyed him in a single afternoon." "He destroyed himself," Dominic corrected. "I merely ensured accountability." "And what about me?" she asked. "Is this elaborate humiliation your idea of accountability for my actions?" Dominic regarded her dispassionately. This wasn't about you, Adrian. It was about stopping a predator who has harmed multiple families. Your situation will be addressed separately. Our situation, she corrected. We're still married. Technically, Dominic agreed, though I think we both know that's a temporary condition. He closed his briefcase. I'll have Patricia contact you tomorrow to discuss terms. As Dominic left the Mariner Club, he felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a cold certainty that he had taken the necessary steps to neutralize a threat. Sullivan had been exposed and would face consequences from multiple directions. The professional, financial, and legal repercussions would be severe and lasting. Phase 2 of his counter-strategy was complete. Now it was time to address the personal betrayal, the dissolution of his marriage, and the rebuilding of his life without Adrian. Back at his hotel, Dominic found an unexpected visitor waiting in the lobby. Lydia Foster, his younger sister, rose from a plush chair as he approached, her expression concerned. Russell called me, she explained, embracing him briefly. Said you might need family right now, even if you wouldn't admit it. Dominic's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly at his sister's presence. Lydia was the only person who truly understood his history, the childhood traumas that had shaped his approach to betrayal, the painful lessons about trust that had informed his worldview. I'm handling it, he said as they rode the elevator to his suite. I know you are, Lydia replied. You always handle everything. That's what worries me. Inside the suite, Dominic poured them both drinks and gave Lydia a condensed version of recent events. She listened without interruption, her expressive face registering shock, anger, and sorrow as the story unfolded. So what happens now? She asked when he finished. The divorce proceeds. Foster Security recovers from the attempted data breach. Life continues. Lydia studied her brother's impassive expression. And what about you, Dom? Not the company, not the legal proceedings, you. How are you processing this? For the first time since discovering Adrienne's betrayal, Dominic allowed himself to acknowledge the personal impact. I miscalculated, he said quietly. I believed our partnership was secure. I failed to identify the vulnerability until it was exploited. That's still analyzing it like a security problem, Lydia observed. What about the emotional aspect? Dominic stared out the window at the city lights. Emotion is inefficient in crisis. And after the crisis passes, he turned to face his sister. Then I'll evaluate the emotional impact and address it accordingly. Lydia sighed. Some things can't be managed like security protocols, Dom. Sometimes you have to actually feel them. I'm aware, he replied, but not yet. Not until this is resolved. As Lydia prepared to leave, she embraced him again, more tightly this time. Promise me you won't lose yourself in this process. Getting justice is important, but so is your humanity. Dominic nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. His humanity had always been secondary to his responsibility to protect what he valued: his company, his employees, his family. Adrian had threatened all of it. Addressing the threat took precedence over processing his feelings about her betrayal. After Lydia left, Dominic returned to his laptop, reviewing the day's events and planning the next steps. Sullivan had been neutralized as a threat, but Adrian remained unpredictable. Her access to sensitive information, combined with her intelligence and now desperate situation, made her dangerous. His phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. You've made a serious mistake. This isn't over. Sullivan, predictably lashing out. Dominic deleted the message without responding. Threats from a falling adversary were meaningless. A moment later, his phone rang. It was Patricia. Sullivan's already trying to recover, she reported. He's contacted several of his legal connections, attempting to frame the situation as a vindictive attack by a jealous husband. Expected, Dominic replied. And ineffective. The evidence speaks for itself. Agreed. But he's desperate, which makes him dangerous. And Adrian has been trying to access additional company files all evening. She's getting increasingly aggressive with her attempts. Let her try, Dominic said. Each attempt is documented and strengthens our position in the divorce proceedings. After ending the call, Dominic closed his laptop and poured another drink. In the quiet of the hotel room, with no immediate tasks requiring his attention, the first real wave of anger finally surfaced, not just at Adrienne's betrayal, but at his own failure to see it coming. He had built his reputation on identifying vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. He had protected corporate giants from the most sophisticated cyber threats in the world. Yet he had missed the signs of deception in his own home from the person he had trusted most. That failure demanded analysis. What indicators had he overlooked? What patterns had he misinterpreted? Understanding the breakdown in his personal security protocols was essential to preventing similar vulnerabilities in the future. As Dominic reviewed the past year of his marriage, he identified numerous warning signs that now seemed obvious. Adrienne's increasing criticism of his work hours, her sudden interest in volunteering at university events, the gradual withdrawal of physical affection, the unexplained absences attributed to book club or charity planning. The analysis was clinical, detached from the emotional implications. This wasn't about heartbreak. It was about system failure and the implementation of improved detection methods for future relationships. By midnight, Dominic had drafted comprehensive plans for the next phase of his counter-strategy. The divorce would proceed quickly, with terms that protected his company while offering Adrienne enough financial support to make a protracted legal battle unattractive. Sullivan would be systematically removed from any position of academic influence through coordinated pressure from multiple directions: legal, financial, and reputational. And most importantly, Foster Security would emerge stronger, its systems enhanced by lessons learned from this breach attempt. What Adrienne and Sullivan had intended as a devastating attack would ultimately become a case study in threat response and organizational resilience. As Dominic finally prepared for sleep, he reviewed the day's accomplishments with cold satisfaction. The trap set for him had been reversed. The predators had become the prey. And while personal vulnerability had been exposed, the damage was being systematically contained and repaired. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of resolution. For now, that knowledge was enough to allow him the few hours of rest required for optimal performance. Chapter 6. Points of No Return. Thursday dawned with news that exceeded even Dominic's carefully calculated expectations. Russell arrived at the hotel with morning coffee and a tablet displaying multiple news alerts. Stanford placed Sullivan on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, he reported as Dominic scanned the headlines. And it gets better. 2 more universities where he previously worked have opened investigations into his conduct there. The dam is broken. Dominic nodded, accepting the coffee. And Adrienne checked into the Four Seasons around midnight. Used your joint credit card. Ordered room service and a bottle of Dom Perignon. Russell raised an eyebrow. Stress shopping or a celebration? Last hurrah, Dominic replied. She knows access to those funds, and soon. The elevator pinged, and Patricia Windsor emerged, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Good, you're both here, she said briskly. We have developments. Inside Dominic's suite, Patricia laid out the latest information. Sullivan had hired Gregory Palmer, a high-profile attorney known for representing disgraced executives and academic figures. Palmer had already reached out, suggesting a private resolution that would benefit all parties. He's looking for a buyout, Patricia translated. Sullivan wants you to pay him to go away quietly. Predictable, Dominic observed. Decline the offer. Remind Palmer that attempting to extract payment could constitute extortion under the circumstances. Patricia nodded. Already done. Now about Adrienne. She called my office this morning, quite distressed. Apparently, her acceptance to Stanford Law has been rescinded pending review of her application process. A faint smile touched Dominic's lips. The committee works quickly. She blames you, of course, Patricia continued. Threatened various forms of retaliation. I reminded her that such threats would be noted in our ongoing documentation. And her response? Incoherent rage followed by tactical retreat. She'll contact us when she's ready to be reasonable. Patricia's tone made clear her assessment of that possibility. Dominic turned to Russell. Security status at the house. All systems operational. She hasn't returned there since checking into the hotel. We're monitoring all access points and communication channels. Good. Dominic checked his watch. I have a company leadership meeting in 30 minutes. We need to address the operational impacts directly. At Foster Security Headquarters, Dominic convened his executive team. The mood was somber as he outlined the situation in clear, unemotional terms. Adrienne's betrayal, Sullivan's manipulation, the attempted data breach, and the countermeasures implemented. This was a targeted attack using a personal vector, Dominic concluded. Its failure demonstrates the effectiveness of our security protocols, but also highlights areas for improvement. We will use this experience to enhance our defenses against similar threats in the future. Eliza Morgan, the chief legal officer, spoke first. The team is with you, Dom, but we need to understand the potential fallout. Could this affect client confidence? Regulatory scrutiny? Valid concerns, Dominic acknowledged. We've already initiated proactive outreach to key clients, framing this as a sophisticated attack that our systems successfully repelled. Regulatory bodies have been updated on the breach attempt through appropriate channels, with emphasis on our rapid response and containment. Mason Reeves raised his hand. What about the personal aspect? The media will eat this up if it leaks. Tech security guru's wife tries to hack his company. The divorce proceedings will include strict confidentiality provisions, Dominic replied. All parties have significant incentive to maintain privacy. Nevertheless, our PR team has prepared response strategies for various disclosure scenarios. The meeting continued with detailed technical discussions of security enhancements and procedural adjustments. Throughout, Dominic maintained his characteristic composure, addressing each concern and strategic clarity. Only Russell, watching his friend closely, noticed the subtle indicators of strain, the occasional tightening around Dominic's eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders when Adrienne's name was mentioned. After the meeting, Russell followed Dominic back to his office. You know you don't have to do this alone, he said, closing the door behind them. The company is secure. The legal situation is under control. Maybe take a few days. Process what's happened. Dominic shook his head. Processing can wait. Resolution cannot. Dom. I appreciate the concern. Dominic cut him off, his tone softening slightly. But this isn't the time for introspection. Every hour that passes without definitive action increases the risk of unexpected variables. Russell sighed, recognizing the futility of pushing further. At least tell me you're eating something besides room service and conference room sandwiches. A ghost of a smile crossed Dominic's face. Lydia's bringing dinner tonight. Good. Someone needs to make sure you remember you're human. By mid-afternoon, Patricia returned with updates on the divorce proceedings. We've drafted the initial filing with terms that protect your essential interests while offering Adrienne a reasonable settlement. Enough to start her new life, but not enough to fund potential retribution. Dominic reviewed the documents carefully. The terms were precisely as he had specified. Adrienne would receive a lump sum payment representing approximately 15% of their marital assets, excluding his company's shares. The house would be sold with proceeds divided. Personal property would be allocated according to a detailed inventory, and all parties would be bound by comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The financial terms are less generous than California law typically dictates, Patricia noted. But given the documented breach, attempt, and conspiracy with Sullivan, we have leverage to negotiate downward. She won't accept these terms initially, Dominic predicted, signing the papers. Her pride will demand more. Agreed. But her practical options are limited, especially with Sullivan's downfall and her Stanford rejection. She needs this to conclude quickly if she wants to salvage any future opportunities. After Patricia departed, Dominic received an unexpected visitor. Vanessa Chun, Adrienne's closest friend and confidant for over a decade, appeared at his office door, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. We need to talk, she announced without preamble. Dominic gestured to a chair. I'm listening. Vanessa remained standing. What the hell happened? Adrienne is falling apart. Lawrence is facing professional ruin. And you're here, business as usual, like nothing's wrong. An interesting perspective, Dominic replied calmly. Did Adrienne explain her role in recent events? The affair? the attempted corporate espionage, the conspiracy to maximize divorce settlement through leveraged information. Vanessa's certainty wavered. She said, "You misunderstood. That Lawrence was just helping with her law school applications." Did she? Dominic opened a folder on his desk and slid several photographs across to Vanessa. Images of Adrian and Sullivan in intimate situations spanning months, documented by Dominic's surveillance operation. Vanessa stared at the photos, her expression shifting from disbelief to realization. "She lied to me," she whispered. "She lied to everyone," Dominic corrected, "including herself, perhaps. But this public destruction of Lawrence, the Stanford Committee, those other men at the Mariner Club, was that necessary? Sullivan has manipulated multiple women into gathering sensitive information from their husbands, then used that information to extract inflated settlements while taking substantial cuts for himself. His pattern of predatory behavior extends back decades." Dominic's voice remained steady. "So yes, the public reckoning was necessary, not just for my situation, but for all the others affected by his operations." Vanessa sank into the chair, visibly processing this new information. "I encouraged her, to apply to law school. I thought she seemed unfulfilled, restless. I never imagined." "You couldn't have known," Dominic said, his tone softening slightly. "Sullivan is skilled at identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them. What happens now? The divorce proceeds. Adrian receives a settlement that allows her to move forward with her life. Sullivan faces the consequences of his actions through multiple institutional investigations and potential legal proceedings." Vanessa studied him with new understanding. "And you? What do you get from all this besides revenge?" "Resolution," Dominic replied. "The elimination of a security threat. Protection of what I've built. That's very clinical." "It's necessary," Dominic countered. "Emotion clouds judgment. This situation requires clarity." After Vanessa left, Dominic returned to his work, reviewing company operations and security protocols with his characteristic focus. The conversation had been unexpected, but potentially useful. Vanessa would likely share her new understanding with other members of their social circle, helping to shape the narrative around the divorce in ways that aligned with Dominic's preferred outcomes. The controlled management of information flow was critical in situations like this. Public perception could influence legal proceedings, professional relationships, and future opportunities. By ensuring key individuals received accurate accounts of events, Dominic was establishing a foundation of credibility that would withstand inevitable attempts by Adrian or Sullivan to reframe the narrative. Late that afternoon, Dominic received word that Adrian had been seen entering their home, accompanied by two women he didn't recognize. Security footage showed them systematically collecting items throughout the house: clothing, jewelry, personal documents, and framed photographs. Dominic watched the footage dispassionately. The physical objects meant little to him. What mattered were the digital assets, intellectual property, and financial resources, all of which had been secured against unauthorized access. As evening approached, Dominic left the office and returned to his hotel, where Lydia was waiting with dinner as promised. She had prepared his favorite meal from childhood, a simple pasta dish their mother had made on special occasions. "You look exhausted," she observed as they ate. "Functioning within acceptable parameters," Dominic replied. Lydia rolled her eyes. "Only you would describe your well-being like a system status report." For the first time in days, Dominic felt something close to amusement. "Old habits." "Dom," Lydia said, her expression turning serious. "What's the end game here?" "You've neutralized Sullivan. The divorce is proceeding. The company is secure. What more are you looking for?" Dominic considered the question carefully. "Comprehensive resolution. Sullivan's academic career is effectively over, but his underlying operation may continue in different forms. Adrian still possesses knowledge that could be harmful if leveraged properly. The threat has been contained, but not eliminated. And does elimination of the threat include elimination of your feelings about what happened?" Dominic's expression remained impassive. "Feelings are irrelevant to the operational requirements." "Bullshit," Lydia said bluntly. "I know you, remember? The little boy who cried for weeks when dad left. The teenager who punched a wall when your first girlfriend cheated. The man who still visits mom's grave every month with fresh flowers. You feel things deeply, Dom. You just hide it better than most. For a moment, the carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the pain beneath. What would you have me do, Lydia? Break down? Rage? Beg her to explain why 15 years meant nothing. Maybe not those exact things, Lydia replied gently, but something human, something that acknowledges the loss. Dominic stared at his half-eaten dinner. I can't afford that luxury yet. Not until this is finished. And when will it be finished? When Sullivan loses his career. When Adrian signs the divorce papers. When everyone who betrayed you has suffered sufficiently. Where does it end? Before Dominic could answer, his phone rang. Patricia Windsor calling with urgent news. Sullivan's attorney contacted me with a revised proposal, she reported. Sullivan offers to leave academia permanently, relocate out of state, and sever all contact with Adrian in exchange for a confidential financial settlement. He's still looking for a payout, Dominic observed. Decline. There's more, Patricia continued. Adrian has separately reached out through a new attorney, Caroline Winters. She's indicated willingness to accept our proposed settlement terms with minor modifications if we can conclude things quickly and discreetly. This was unexpected. Dominic had anticipated more resistance, more negotiation. What modifications? Additional personal property allocations, accelerated timeline, and a mutual non-disparagement clause with financial penalties for violations. Reasonable, Dominic acknowledged. Draft the revised agreement for my review. After ending the call, Dominic turned back to Lydia, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with concern. It's nearly over, he told her. Adrian is accepting the settlement terms. Sullivan is seeking an exit strategy. And then what? Lydia pressed. What comes after the victory? Dominic had no immediate answer. For days, his focus had been exclusively on neutralizing threats and securing his company's future. The prospect of resolution brought with it an unexpected emptiness, a void where purpose had been. I don't know, he admitted finally. I haven't thought that far ahead. Lydia reached across the table to squeeze his hand. That's okay. You don't have to know yet. Just promise me you'll give yourself permission to feel whatever comes next, instead of analyzing it like a security protocol. After Lydia left, Dominic stood at the hotel window, watching the city lights below. The events of the past days had unfolded with a precision that should have brought satisfaction. Sullivan's career was in ruins. Adrian was accepting defeat. Foster Security had emerged stronger from the attempted breach. Yet beneath the strategic success, a hollowness remained, a space once filled with trust, partnership, shared memories. 15 years of marriage couldn't be erased by logical analysis or tactical victories. For the first time since discovering Adrienne's betrayal, Dominic allowed himself to acknowledge the personal loss. Not just the betrayal itself, but the destruction of his belief in the relationship they had built. Everything he had thought was real, their connection, their shared vision, their mutual support, had been undermined by her deception. The realization brought no tears, no outward display of emotion. But something shifted internally, a recognition that the damage extended beyond security protocols and corporate assets. Something fundamental had been broken in his understanding of human connection, of trust, of vulnerability. As Dominic prepared for bed, his phone lit up with a text from Adrian. I never meant for it to end this way. He stared at the message, considering whether to respond. After a moment, he typed, Everything ends exactly as our choices dictate. Her reply came quickly. Some choices seem right until you see their consequences. Dominic closed the messaging app without responding further. Philosophical exchanges about choices and consequences were meaningless now. Action had replaced intention. Reality had replaced justification. Tomorrow would bring the formal conclusion to their marriage, a legal document severing ties that had once seemed unbreakable. The threat would be neutralized, the security breach contained, the vulnerability patched. But as Dominic finally drifted toward sleep, Lydia's question echoed in his mind. What comes after the victory? Chapter 7. Calculated Outcomes. Friday morning arrived with a clarity that matched Dominic's mental state. The confusion and uncertainty of previous days have been replaced by a crystalline focus on concluding this chapter definitively. Patricia arrived at his hotel suite early, bearing the revised divorce agreement based on Adrienne's attorney's modifications. Dominic reviewed the document meticulously, approving the changes that were reasonable and annotating those that required adjustment. "She's being surprisingly accommodating," Patricia observed as she collected the marked-up papers. "I expected more resistance given her previous position." "Sullivan's downfall changed her calculations," Dominic replied. "Without his influence and support, she's prioritizing a clean exit over maximum financial gain. And the mutual non-disparagement clause? That benefits her more than you, given the circumstances." "Let her have it," Dominic said. "Public recriminations serve no strategic purpose." Patricia studied him with professional assessment. "The signing is scheduled for 3 p.m. at my office. Will you be able to maintain this level of detachment face-to-face?" "Of course," Dominic answered without hesitation. Emotional display would be counterproductive. After Patricia departed, Dominic received a call from Mason Reeves, his chief technology officer. "We've completed the comprehensive security audit you requested," Mason reported. "All sensitive systems have been verified clean. No evidence of successful data extraction despite multiple attempts." "Excellent. Implement the enhanced monitoring protocols we discussed and prepare a detailed briefing for the board." "Already in progress," Mason confirmed. "And Dom, the team asked me to tell you they're behind you 100%. Personal stuff included." Dominic felt an unexpected warmth at his team's loyalty. "Appreciated." Normal operations resume Monday. With the company secure and the divorce proceeding as planned, Dominic turned his attention to the final component of his counter-strategy, ensuring Sullivan's complete removal from positions of influence. A call to Victor Zhao confirmed that the evidence gathered during their dinner meeting had been shared with Stanford's investigating committee and key figures at other institutions where Sullivan had connections. Victor had also discreetly informed several major university donors about Sullivan's methods, effectively closing off potential funding sources for any institution that might consider employing him in the future. "He's finished in academia," Victor assured Dominic. "The only question is whether criminal charges will follow. That depends on how many of his former targets decide to pursue legal action," Dominic replied. "I've provided them with the necessary evidence. The choice is theirs." By noon, Dominic had received confirmation that Adrienne had checked out of the Four Seasons. Security footage showed her entering their home briefly, then departing with additional personal items. She had left her keys on the kitchen counter, a small but symbolic surrender of the shared space. Just before leaving for the signing meeting, Dominic received an unexpected visitor at his hotel suite. Emily Taylor, Adrienne's younger sister, stood at his door with reddened eyes and a determined expression. "You couldn't even give her a chance to explain," Emily accused as soon as Dominic invited her in. 15 years of marriage, and you throw it away over one mistake." Dominic regarded her calmly. "Your sister didn't make one mistake, Emily. She engaged in a systematic betrayal over many months. She conspired with Sullivan to compromise my company. She gathered sensitive information with the explicit intent of using it as leverage against me. She made bad choices because she was unhappy," Emily countered. "Because you were always working, always focused on the company instead of your marriage." "Perhaps," Dominic acknowledged. "But unhappiness doesn't justify betrayal. It justifies conversation, counseling, even divorce, if necessary. It doesn't justify corporate espionage or conspiracy." Emily's anger deflated slightly. "She's devastated, Dom. Everything she planned has fallen apart. Stanford rescinded her acceptance. Her reputation in the community is ruined. She's lost everything." "Not everything," Dominic corrected. "The settlement is fair. She'll have financial security and the freedom to rebuild her life elsewhere." "Money isn't the point," Emily insisted. "She lost you. Despite everything, she still loves you." Dominic's expression remained impassive. Love doesn't coexist with systematic deception, Emily. Your sister made calculated choices that prioritized her desires over a partnership. Those choices have consequences. So that's it. No forgiveness? No second chance. Some broken things can't be repaired, Dominic replied. Trust, once fundamentally violated, is among them. After Emily left, Dominic took a moment to compose himself before heading to Patricia's office. The encounter had been unexpected, but ultimately reinforced his resolve. Adrian was attempting to reframe the narrative through family members, portraying herself as the remorseful wife who had made a mistake rather than the calculating conspirator revealed by the evidence. That narrative shift was tactically sound, but factually inaccurate. Dominic had seen the messages, the planning, the coordination with Sullivan. This wasn't a momentary lapse or an emotional affair. It was a strategic operation designed to extract maximum value while causing maximum damage. Forgiveness might be possible for human weakness. It was not appropriate for calculated exploitation. At precisely 3 p.m., Dominic entered Patricia's office to find Adrian already seated beside her attorney, Caroline Winters, a sharp-featured woman known for her efficiency in high-net-worth divorces. Adrian looked up as he entered, her expression a carefully composed mask of dignity under pressure. Mr. Foster, Caroline greeted him professionally. Thank you for accommodating our request for an expedited resolution. Dominic nodded, taking the seat opposite Adrian without directly acknowledging her. Patricia joined them, placing the finalized agreement on the table. Both parties have reviewed the terms. Patricia began formally. The division of assets is as specified in Addendum A. The confidentiality and non-disparagement provisions are detailed in Section 4. The timeline for property liquidation and fund transfers is outlined in Section 7. Caroline nodded. My client has reviewed and accepts these terms. As does mine, Patricia confirmed. What followed was a process of signatures and initials. The legal dismantling of 15 years of marriage reduced to a series of pen strokes on premium paper. Throughout, Dominic maintained his composure, signing each page with the same efficiency he brought to business contracts. Adrian was less successful at hiding her emotions. Her hand trembled slightly on certain signatures, and she paused once to take a steadying breath before continuing. When the final signature was complete, Patricia gathered the documents. Copies will be provided to both parties. The court filing will be completed by end of day. Once approved by the judge, which should be expedited given the uncontested nature, the financial transactions will proceed according to the specified timeline. And that concludes our business, Caroline stated, standing and offering a professional handshake to Patricia. Thank you for your cooperation. As the attorneys stepped aside to discuss procedural details, Dominic and Adrian found themselves momentarily alone at the table. For the first time since entering the room, he allowed himself to truly look at her, the woman who had shared his bed, his home, his life for 15 years. Was any of it real? He asked quietly, the question emerging before he could apply his usual filters. Adrian met his gaze, her green eyes swimming with unshed tears. Most of it was, she answered softly. Until it wasn't. When did it change? I don't know exactly. Gradually, then suddenly. She hesitated. You built walls around yourself, Dom. Year by year, they got higher. I couldn't reach you anymore. So you found someone who could be reached? Dominic observed without inflection. It wasn't that simple. It never is, he acknowledged. But complexity doesn't excuse betrayal. Adrienne's composure cracked slightly. What you did to Lawrence was excessive, vindictive. What I did to Sullivan was proportional, Dominic corrected. He's built a career exploiting vulnerable women and extracting wealth from their husbands through manipulation and blackmail. The consequences he's facing are the direct result of his own actions, magnified by the number of lives he's damaged. And what about the damage you've done? Adrian challenged, a flash of her old spirit emerging. You think I don't know about your surveillance? The cameras? The phone taps? You invaded my privacy for weeks. After you invaded my company's security, Dominic countered calmly. Every action I took was defensive, Adrian. You and Sullivan were the aggressors in this scenario, regardless of how you try to reframe it. Caroline returned before Adrian could respond, gently touching her client's shoulder. We should go. The car is waiting. Adrian gathered her belongings and stood, composing herself with visible effort. She looked at Dominic one last time, searching his face for something, regret, perhaps, or a flicker of the connection they had once shared. Finding nothing but controlled neutrality, she nodded slightly. Goodbye, Dom. Goodbye, Adrian, he replied evenly. As she walked away, Dominic remained seated, watching her departure with the same analytical detachment he had maintained throughout the process. Only the slightest tightening of his jaw betrayed any emotional response to this final separation. Patricia rejoined him after showing the others out. That went as smoothly as could be expected, she observed. The judge has already indicated he'll sign off on the agreement Monday morning. By next week, the financial transfers will be complete. And Sullivan, accepting reality, finally, his attorney called while you were signing. They're withdrawing all counter-allegations and agreeing to a complete severance of contact. He's apparently received offers for positions in several European universities and is planning to relocate immediately. Dominic nodded. Ensure the evidence files remain secure. If he attempts to rebuild his operation elsewhere, his previous targets should have the necessary information to prevent it. Already arranged, Patricia assured him. Now what about you? What comes next? It was the same question Lydia had asked, one Dominic still didn't have a clear answer for. The immediate threat had been neutralized. The divorce was proceeding efficiently. The company was secure. The strategic objectives had been achieved. Business as usual, he replied finally. The company requires my full attention after this disruption. Patricia studied him with the insight gained from decades of professional observation. Take some time, Dominic. Even the most disciplined minds need recalibration after trauma. This wasn't trauma, Dominic countered. It was a security breach that has been contained and resolved. If you say so, Patricia replied, unconvinced. But my advice stands. Time and distance provide perspective that immersion denies. After leaving Patricia's office, Dominic didn't return to his hotel or the company headquarters. Instead, he drove to the coastal highway, following the winding road north until he reached a secluded outlook where he and Adrian had once watched a meteor shower in the early years of their relationship. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, waves crashing against the cliffs below as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Dominic stood at the guardrail, the wind buffeting his precisely tailored suit, and allowed himself to acknowledge the weight of what had transpired. 15 years of shared life. Gone. Trust built over thousands of days. Shattered. A partnership he had believed unbreakable. Dissolved. For the first time since discovering Adrienne's betrayal, Dominic permitted himself to feel the full impact of the loss. Not just the strategic implications or the operational adjustments, but the personal devastation of having his fundamental assumptions about his life proven false. No tears came. Dominic had learned long ago to contain such visible manifestations of emotion. But something shifted inside him, a recognition that beneath the tactical victories and strategic maneuvers of recent days, a profound wound had been inflicted, one that logical analysis and controlled response couldn't fully address. As the sun touched the horizon, casting golden light across the turbulent water, Dominic made a decision. He had managed the crisis. Now it was time to manage the aftermath with equal care, not just for the company, but for himself. Pulling out his phone, he called Russell. I need you to handle operations for the next 2 weeks, he said without preamble. I'm taking some time off. Russell's surprise was evident even through the phone. Really? That's unexpected, but good. Where are you going? Northern Cascade Mountains. The property my grandfather left me. The remote cabin had been Dominic's refuge during previous life transitions. After leaving his first company, during the early struggles of building foster security following his mother's death. Perfect, Russell approved. Complete digital detox. Just what you need. Not quite, Dominic amended. I'll maintain secure communication channels for emergencies. But day-to-day operations are yours until I return. After ending the call, Dominic remained at the Outlook until the sun disappeared completely, leaving only darkening blues and purples across the sky. The chapter with Adrian was closed. The threat from Sullivan had been neutralized. Now it was time to recalibrate, to assess the damage and implement repairs, just as he would for any system after a breach attempt. The difference, as Lydia had pointed out, was that this system was human, and human systems required different restoration protocols than digital ones. As Dominic finally turned back toward his car, he felt something he hadn't experienced in days. Not closure, exactly, but the beginning of acceptance. The certainty that while significant damage had been done, recovery was possible. Different, perhaps, from what had existed before, but functional, resilient, secure. The resilience that had carried him through previous betrayals would serve him again. The analytical mind that had built his company would help rebuild his personal foundation. And the strategic thinking that had neutralized threats would guide him toward a future where vulnerability was managed rather than eliminated. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a necessary first step toward whatever came next. Chapter 8. Recalibration. The Cascade Mountain cabin stood exactly as Dominic remembered, a sophisticated blend of rustic architecture and modern amenities, nestled among ancient pines with views of snow-capped peaks. His grandfather, a retired engineer with a passion for self-sufficient living, had designed the space to be both beautiful and functional, isolated yet connected when necessary. As Dominic unlocked the heavy wooden door, the familiar scent of cedar and pine welcomed him home. He'd arranged for the caretaker to stock essentials and prepare the space, so a fire already crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the open-concept main room. For the first time in weeks, Dominic felt his shoulders relax slightly. Here, 1,000 miles from Palo Alto, the constant vigilance required by recent events could be temporarily suspended. Not eliminated. Dominic's mind didn't work that way, but reduced to a background process rather than primary function. After storing his minimal luggage, Dominic performed a check of the property: security systems, generators, water supply, communication equipment. Everything functioned perfectly, as he'd expected. His grandfather had instilled in him the importance of systems maintenance, both mechanical and personal. The most dangerous failures, his grandfather had told him, are the ones you don't see coming because you weren't paying attention to the warning signs. The irony wasn't lost on Dominic. Despite his vigilance in business, he had missed the warning signs in his marriage, or perhaps ignored them, subconsciously choosing the comfort of assumption over the discomfort of investigation. That evening, Dominic sat on the cabin's wraparound porch, nursing a glass of his grandfather's favorite whiskey as darkness settled over the mountains. The isolation was precisely what he needed: space to process events without the constant demands of the company or the expectations of others. His phone vibrated with a text from Lydia. Cabin check-in confirmed. "Don't completely disappear on us, okay?" Dominic smiled faintly as he replied. "Signal strength acceptable. We'll maintain periodic communication. Try using emotional words occasionally," came Lydia's immediate response. "They're good for the soul." Rather than continuing the exchange, Dominic set the phone aside and returned his attention to the darkening landscape. His sister meant well, but emotional expression had never been his natural language. Analysis, strategy, resolution. These are the frameworks through which he processed experience. Yet even he recognized that the analytical approach had limits when applied to personal trauma. The betrayal by Adrian and Sullivan couldn't be fully resolved through strategic countermeasures or logical assessment. Something more fundamental was required: a recalibration of his understanding of trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. The mountain's silence enveloped him as night fully descended, stars emerging in breathtaking clarity above the tree-line. In this pristine isolation, Dominic began the mental process he had postponed during the immediate crisis: a comprehensive review of his marriage, searching not for tactical failures, but for deeper patterns that had led to its collapse. Had he been too focused on the company? Undoubtedly. Foster security had demanded extraordinary commitment, especially in its early years. But Adrian had seemed to understand that, had even encouraged his dedication to building something meaningful. Had he neglected emotional connection? Possibly. Expression of feelings had never been his strength, though he had demonstrated his commitment through actions rather than words. Financial security, thoughtful gifts, practical support for Adrian's interests and needs. Had there been warning signs he missed? Definitely. Retrospective analysis revealed numerous indicators of growing distance. Changes in Adrian's social circles, increased criticism of his work hours, subtle shifts in physical intimacy, unexplained absences explained away with plausible but unverified reasons. But the most significant realization came as dawn approached. Regardless of contributing factors, the fundamental breach had been Adrian's choice to betray rather than communicate. The appropriate response to marital dissatisfaction was conversation, counseling, or at worst, an honest separation, not conspiracy, deception, and attempted destruction. This clarity brought a certain peace. While Dominic could acknowledge areas where he might have contributed to their growing distance, the responsibility for choosing betrayal over honesty rested solely with Adrian. As the first light of morning touched the mountain peaks, Dominic finally slept, not the vigilant half-rest of recent weeks, but a deeper surrender to exhaustion. His last conscious thought was that recovery, like any complex system restoration, would require both time and a structured approach. For the next 3 days, Dominic established a new routine far removed from his normal corporate rhythms. Mornings began with physical exertion, hiking the challenging trails surrounding the property, pushing his body to match the demands he regularly placed on his mind. Afternoons were dedicated to cabin maintenance and improvement projects that his grandfather had outlined in journals left behind. Evenings were spent reading, not security briefings or technical manuals, but the philosophical and historical texts that had shaped his worldview in younger years. On the 4th day, Russell called with an update on Foster security operations. The company was functioning smoothly, client confidence had been maintained, and the enhanced security protocols implemented after Adrian's breach attempt were proving effective. "The team misses you," Russell reported, "but everyone agrees the break is well-deserved. Take the full 2 weeks, Dom. We've got things covered. Any word on Sullivan or Adrian?" Dominic asked, surprising himself with the question. Sullivan accepted a position at a small university in Switzerland. Significantly reduced prestige, but at least he's employed. The Stanford investigation continues, with more former students coming forward. And Adrian? Russell hesitated briefly. She's moved to Portland. Her sister Emily lives there. The house sale is proceeding as planned. Apparently, there's already a good offer from a tech executive relocating from Seattle. Dominic absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Thank you for the update. Continue with standard protocols. I'll check in again in 3 days." After ending the call, Dominic found himself standing at the cabin's picture window, staring at the mountain vista without really seeing it. The information about Adrienne's relocation had triggered an unexpected emotional response. Not regret or longing, but a strange emptiness. The woman who had shared his life for 15 years was constructing a new existence that would never intersect with his again. It was the logical outcome of recent events, exactly as he had strategically planned. Yet the finality carried a weight he hadn't fully anticipated. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains, Dominic did something he had avoided for weeks. He reviewed photos of his life with Adrienne. Not the surveillance images documenting her betrayal, but the earlier pictures of happier times. Their wedding day, vacations around the world, quiet moments in their home. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky as he studied the images with analytical detachment that gradually gave way to something more complicated. The woman in these photos, laughing on a Hawaiian beach, concentrated while painting in a Tuscan vineyard, sleeping peacefully beside him on a rainy Sunday morning, seemed fundamentally different from the person who had conspired with Sullivan to destroy everything they had built. Had she changed so dramatically? Or had he simply failed to see who she truly was beneath the surface connection? Perhaps both were true. People evolved, sometimes in directions that made continued partnership impossible. Perception was imperfect, especially when clouded by assumption and routine. The failure wasn't in the eventual separation, but in the method chosen to execute it. As thunder rolled through the mountain valley, Dominic closed the photo files and poured another measure of whiskey. The analytical exercise had confirmed what he already knew. The marriage had been irretrievably broken, not just by Adrienne's actions, but by the gradual divergence of their paths over years. The betrayal wasn't the cause of their ending. It was merely the catalyst that had accelerated an inevitable conclusion. This realization brought an unexpected sense of release. The tactical victory over Adrienne and Sullivan had been necessary, but insufficient for true resolution. Understanding the broader context of their failure as partners completed the picture in ways that strategic countermeasures could not. On the seventh day, Dominic received an unexpected email from Patricia Windsor. The subject line was simply, "For your information." The message contained a forwarded email from Adrienne to Patricia, clearly sent with the expectation it would reach Dominic. "I know he won't speak to me directly, so I'm hoping you'll share this. I've had time to reflect on everything that happened, and while I still believe Dom's response was disproportionate, I understand why he felt betrayed. My methods were wrong, regardless of my reasons. Lawrence manipulated me, but I allowed that manipulation because it aligned with what I wanted to believe. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know Dom well enough to understand that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But I want him to know that despite everything, the majority of our 15 years together were real. My feelings for him were genuine, even when they became complicated by dissatisfaction and resentment. I'm starting over in Portland, using my settlement to open a small art gallery. No law school, no corporate ambitions, just the creative path I abandoned years ago. Perhaps there's a certain justice in returning to who I was before we met. Tell him I hope he finds peace and, eventually, someone who fits better with the man he's become. I'll always regret the pain I caused, even if I can't fully regret the separation itself. Adrienne." Dominic read the message 3 times, analyzing its content from multiple perspectives. Was it sincere reflection or strategic communication designed to improve her position in their social circles? Was the art gallery narrative genuine or constructed to appear sympathetic? Did it matter? After careful consideration, Dominic replied to Patricia with characteristic brevity. Message received. No response necessary. The email's arrival had disrupted the careful equilibrium Dominic had been establishing. He spent the rest of the day on an extended hike, pushing himself physically until his mind quieted. The mountain trail led to a pristine alpine lake where he sat for hours, watching clouds reflect on the still water, processing Adrienne's words without allowing them to derail his recovery. By evening, he had reached a conclusion. Adrienne's perspective, whether genuine or calculated, was irrelevant to his path forward. Their chapter was closed. Her narrative of events, justifications, regrets, or new beginnings, no longer required his attention or response. That night, a different kind of storm arrived. Not the dramatic lightning and thunder of previous days, but a gentle, persistent rain that continued through the following morning. Dominic sat on the covered porch, watching water droplets collect on pine needles and listening to the rhythmic percussion on the cabin's roof. For the first time since discovering Adrienne's betrayal, he felt something approaching peace. Not happiness, exactly, but the absence of active distress. The situation had been contained, analyzed, and resolved according to optimal parameters. What remained was the gradual process of rebuilding, which had already begun. On the 10th day, Dominic received a call from an unknown number. Against his usual protocol, he answered, "Mr. Foster." The voice was vaguely familiar, but not immediately identifiable. "Gregory Palmer. We met briefly at Stanford last year." Dominic placed the voice immediately. Palmer was Sullivan's attorney. "Mr. Palmer, this is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion." Palmer continued smoothly. "I'm calling because Lawrence Sullivan was found dead in his Palo Alto home this morning. Apparent suicide." The information landed with surprising impact. "I see," Dominic replied after a moment. "May I ask why you're informing me specifically?" "He left a note addressed to you," Palmer explained. "The police have the original, but I was asked to communicate its contents directly. Dominic said nothing, waiting. The note reads, Foster, you won this round through superior strategy. I underestimated your capabilities and overestimated my position. Checkmate. Some games aren't worth continuing after defeat. Remember this victory when you face your own inevitable downfall. Everyone falls eventually. Sullivan. Dominic absorbed the message in silence, analyzing its implications from multiple angles. Mr. Foster, are you there? Palmer prompted. Yes, Dominic replied. Thank you for relaying this information. There's one more thing, Palmer added. The police found extensive documentation of Sullivan's operations. Multiple women, multiple settlements. It appears he was preparing to restart elsewhere, but realized his reputation was irreparably damaged. Your name features prominently in his personal journals. I imagine it does, Dominic acknowledged without elaboration. This situation will likely generate media attention, Palmer warned. Given your involvement, I had no direct involvement in Sullivan's decision, Dominic interrupted. My actions were defensive responses to his aggression. His choices thereafter were his own. Of course, Palmer agreed quickly. I merely thought you should be prepared for potential inquiries. After ending the call, Dominic stood motionless on the porch, processing this unexpected development. Sullivan's death wasn't an outcome he had intended or anticipated. The man's operation had been neutralized, his reputation damaged, his academic career severely diminished. But those consequences had been proportional to his actions, not designed to push him towards self-destruction. Yet Dominic couldn't deny a certain coldness in his response to the news. Sullivan had systematically manipulated vulnerable women, exploited their marriages for financial gain, and attempted to destroy Dominic's company in the process. His death was his own final tactical choice in a game he had initiated and lost. Later that evening, as Dominic reviewed security footage from the cabin's perimeter cameras, a habit rather than a necessity, his phone lit up with a call from Lydia. I just heard about Sullivan, she said immediately. Are you okay? I'm fine, Dominic replied truthfully. It was unexpected, but not particularly relevant to my current situation. Not relevant? Dom, the man who tried to destroy your marriage and company just killed himself after you systematically dismantled his life. Correction. After his own actions led to the exposure of his predatory operation, Dominic countered. I didn't dismantle his life, Lydia. I protected mine. I know that, Lydia conceded. But this makes everything more complicated. People will talk. They'll connect you to his death, even though you're not responsible. Let them talk, Dominic said dismissively. Perception management is straightforward when facts support your position. Lydia sighed. Just be careful when you come back. The media might try to create a narrative that doesn't reflect reality. They could try, Dominic agreed. They won't succeed. After the call ended, Dominic returned to the porch, watching darkness settle over the mountains. Sullivan's death added an unexpected variable to the situation, one that required assessment and potentially adjusted strategies upon his return to civilization. But here, in the isolated clarity of the mountains, its immediate significance was limited. Sullivan had made his final choice, just as Adrian had made hers, just as Dominic had made his own. Each decision carried consequences that extended beyond original intentions. The interconnected nature of these choices and consequences created a complex system, one that could be analyzed but never perfectly predicted or controlled. Perhaps that was the most important lesson of recent events. Even the most rigorous security protocols couldn't eliminate all vulnerabilities or anticipate all threats, especially those originating from trusted sources. As Dominic prepared for bed that night, he realized something fundamental had shifted in his perspective. The betrayal by Adrian and Sullivan had been a significant breach, personal, professional, financial. But his response, while necessary and effective, had carried its own cost. The coldness required to execute his counter-strategy had reinforced patterns of emotional distance that had contributed to his marriage's vulnerability in the first place. Moving forward would require more than strategic vigilance. It would require a recalibration of how he engaged with trusted connections, a balance between necessary protection and destructive isolation. Dominic Foster, master of cybersecurity protocols and corporate defense systems, had encountered a vulnerability no firewall could address: the fundamental human need for connection despite the inevitable risks it entailed. As he drifted toward sleep, a new strategic objective formed in his mind. Not the elimination of vulnerability, which was impossible, but its intelligent management. A system that was completely closed was also completely isolated. Functionality required calculated openness, despite the inherent risks. It was a problem worthy of his analytical mind, one that would define his path forward after the current storm had fully passed. Chapter 9. Systems Reconfigured. The final days at the mountain cabin passed in a rhythm of physical exertion, practical tasks, and deepening clarity. Dominic extended his stay by 3 additional days, recognizing that the recalibration process remained incomplete despite significant progress. Sullivan's suicide had generated precisely the media attention Palmer had predicted. Russell forwarded selected articles that framed the situation in various ways, some portraying Sullivan as a predator whose schemes had finally caught up with him, others suggesting a brilliant academic driven to desperation by a vengeful husband's disproportionate response. None of the narratives fully captured the reality Dominic had experienced, but that was expected. External perception rarely aligned perfectly with ground truth, especially in situations with complex motivational factors and limited public information. The PR team recommends a brief statement expressing appropriate regret while maintaining distance from the outcome, Russell advised during their scheduled check-in. Something professionally sympathetic without accepting responsibility. No statement, Dominic decided. Any response legitimizes the connection. Silence is preferable. Are you sure? The Stanford community is particularly vocal about this. Several faculty members have implied you orchestrated a campaign specifically designed to destroy him. Let them speculate, Dominic replied evenly. The facts support our position. Sullivan's own documentation confirms his pattern of behavior with multiple women and divorces. The financial trails connecting him to settlement funds are unambiguous. Time will validate our narrative. On his final morning at the cabin, Dominic hiked to the summit overlooking the property, a challenging trail his grandfather had established decades earlier. The late summer air carried a hint of autumn's approach, and the view stretched for miles in every direction, mountain peaks rising like sentinels against the clear blue sky. Standing at the summit, Dominic allowed himself a rare moment of pure presence, attention fully engaged with the immediate experience rather than divided between current circumstances and strategic calculations. The crisp air, the distant call of an eagle, the solidity of rock beneath his boots. These sensory inputs temporarily displaced the analytical frameworks that usually dominated his consciousness. In this momentary clarity, Dominic recognized the fundamental choice before him. He could emerge from recent events with heightened vigilance against vulnerability, or he could develop more sophisticated methods of managing necessary connections while maintaining strategic defenses. The path of complete isolation would be simpler, cleaner. A fortress with no entry points presented no breach opportunities. But it also offered no growth, no expansion, no collaboration beyond the most rigidly controlled parameters. The alternative required more complex security protocols, systems that could distinguish between acceptable risk and unacceptable threat, that could permit meaningful connection while maintaining vigilant boundary enforcement. As Dominic began his descent from the summit, his decision crystallized. He would not allow Adrian and Sullivan's betrayal to reduce his operational capacity through excessive isolation. Instead, he would develop more sophisticated methods of engagement, ones that acknowledged the necessity of vulnerability while implementing targeted protections against exploitation. Trust would never again be given unconditionally, but neither would it be withheld categorically. The optimal strategy lay in calibrated openness, connection with verification, transparency with monitoring, partnership with defined boundaries. When Dominic finally left the mountains 2 days later, he carried with him not just tactical victories over those who had betrayed him, but strategic clarity about his path forward. The breach had been contained, The vulnerabilities addressed, the threats neutralized. Now it was time to implement the reconfigured system, both professionally and personally. Foster Security's headquarters hummed with purposeful activity as Dominic walked through the main entrance on Monday morning. Employees nodded respectfully, some offering quiet welcomes as he made his way to the executive floor. The atmosphere carried no hint of the crisis that had preceded his departure, a testament to the team's professionalism and the company's resilience. Russell met him at his office door, coffee in hand. "Welcome back. You look different." "Mountain air," Dominic replied, accepting the coffee. "More than that," Russell observed. "You seem recalibrated." Dominic allowed a slight smile at his friend's perceptive choice of terminology. "An accurate assessment." The time away was productive. The teams assembled in the main conference room whenever you're ready. Full operational update as requested. 20 minutes later, Dominic stood before his executive team, his commanding presence immediately focusing their attention. "Recent events tested our security protocols at multiple levels." He began without preamble. The attempted breach, through personal vectors, exposed vulnerabilities that have now been addressed. But it also revealed strategic opportunities that we will implement moving forward. For the next hour, Dominic outlined a comprehensive vision for Foster Security's evolution. Expanded services focusing on personal security integration with corporate defenses, new protocols for identifying insider threats, enhanced monitoring systems for detecting unusual data access patterns. The most sophisticated attacks no longer target technical systems directly, he explained. They target the human connections to those systems. Our competitive advantage will be developing countermeasures that protect both the technology and the people with access to it. By meeting's end, the room vibrated with renewed purpose. What could have been a devastating setback for the company had been transformed into a catalyst for innovation and growth. Personal betrayal transmuted into professional advancement. "One more item," Dominic announced as the meeting concluded. Effective immediately, Russell Hughes will be elevated to co-CEO with primary responsibility for client relationships and business development. Surprise rippled through the room, most visibly on Russell's face. Recent events highlighted the vulnerability of centralized authority structures, Dominic continued. Distributed leadership with appropriate checks and balances provides superior resilience against targeted attacks. The strategic logic was impeccable, but those who knew Dominic best recognized the deeper significance. For the first time, he was willingly sharing control of the company he had built from nothing, not out of weakness, but from a position of calculated strength. As the executives filed out, Russell remained behind. "Co-CEO? We never discussed this. The decision was made during my absence," Dominic replied. Analysis of recent events indicated the necessity of structural adjustment. "This isn't just about organizational resilience," Russell challenged. "What's really going on, Dom?" Dominic met his friend's gaze directly. "The company needs to be more than an extension of my security architecture. It needs to grow beyond my personal parameters. And you trust me to help make that happen?" "Trust with verification," Dominic clarified. "The dual authority structure includes mutual oversight protocols. We'll check each other's blind spots." Russell nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "A reconfigured system." "Precisely." In the weeks that followed, Foster Security implemented Dominic's vision with characteristic efficiency. The company's market position strengthened as clients responded positively to the enhanced service offerings. Industry publications noted the innovative approaches to human technical security integration. Recruitment applications increased as word spread about the company's resilience and growth trajectory. Dominic's personal reconfiguration proceeded with equal discipline. He moved from the hotel to a new residence, a modernist structure of glass and steel overlooking the bay, its security systems state-of-the-art yet unobtrusive. The space reflected his evolved perspective, open to the surrounding environment yet strategically protected, transparent but controlled. His interaction patterns shifted subtly, while maintaining the core discipline that had always defined his professional approach. He implemented calibrated adjustments to his engagement with key relationships. Weekly dinners with Lydia became standard rather than occasional. Regular communication with trusted team members extended beyond strictly operational matters. Carefully vetted professional connections were cultivated with strategic intentionality. These changes weren't emotional concessions, but tactical implementations of his reconfigured understanding. Optimal functionality required selective connection, not complete isolation. 3 months after returning from the mountains, Dominic received an invitation to speak at a prestigious cybersecurity conference in London. The timing aligned with his strategic objectives for Foster Security's international expansion, so he accepted despite his usual reluctance toward public appearances. The conference venue overlooked the Thames, London's historic skyline, providing a dramatic backdrop for discussions of cutting-edge security technologies. Dominic's presentation on integrating personal and corporate security architectures drew significant attention, establishing Foster Security's thought leadership in this emerging domain. During the post-presentation reception, Dominic was approached by a woman whose bearing immediately registered as exceptional. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, Cambridge-educated mathematician and former MI6 cybersecurity specialist, now leading her own consulting firm specializing in advanced encryption protocols. "Your approach to human technical integration is intriguing, Mr. Foster," she observed, her British accent precise, her assessment direct. "Though I question whether your verification matrices account sufficiently for emotional variables in threat assessment." Instead of the reflexive defense such criticism might have previously triggered, Dominic recognized the strategic value in her perspective. "An insightful observation. I'd be interested in your proposed adjustments to the matrices." What followed was a discussion of remarkable depth and precision. Two analytical minds engaging with complex security concepts at a level few could follow. By conversation's end, they had identified potential collaborations between their respective organizations that could advance both firms' capabilities significantly. "I'll have my team draft a preliminary framework for the collaboration," Dominic concluded as they exchanged contact information. "I prefer to handle preliminary frameworks personally," Eleanor countered. "Reduces information distortion through delegation chains." "Dinner tomorrow to discuss parameters?" Dominic assessed the proposal. Professional focus, mutual benefit, controlled environment. "Acceptable. I'll send location details." 6 months later, Foster Security and Blackwood Encryption announced a strategic partnership that positioned both companies at the forefront of integrated security solutions. The collaboration was professionally advantageous, intellectually stimulating, and personally significant for Dominic, a calibrated connection that enhanced his operational capabilities rather than creating vulnerability. His relationship with Eleanor evolved with the same strategic intentionality that characterized their professional collaboration. Neither rushed nor restricted, it developed according to mutually established parameters that respected both autonomy and connection. Trust was extended progressively based on verified reliability rather than emotional assumption. For Dominic, this represented the successful implementation of his reconfigured approach to human engagement. Neither the unconditional openness that had enabled Adrienne's betrayal nor the complete isolation that would have limited his effectiveness. Instead, it was strategic connection with appropriate security protocols, vulnerability management rather than vulnerability elimination. On a crisp autumn evening exactly 1 year after his birthday party had been hijacked by Adrienne's Stanford announcement, Dominic stood on the balcony of his home, watching the city lights below. Eleanor joined him, her quiet presence complementing his contemplative mood. "You're thinking about last year?" she observed. Dominic nodded slightly, assessing system evolution since the breach. "Any assessment results?" "Threats neutralized, vulnerabilities addressed, system functionality significantly enhanced." He turned to face her. The attack vector they chose ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the target. Eleanor studied him with characteristic perception. Some might have responded differently. Retreated, isolated, become permanently defensive. "Inefficient strategies," Dominic replied. Security isn't about eliminating all access points. It's about controlling which ones remain open and to whom. Later that evening, as Eleanor worked on encryption algorithms in his home office, Dominic received an unexpected email from Patricia Windsor. The subject line read simply, FYI recent development. The message contained a forwarded news article about Adrian Foster's art gallery in Portland, which had apparently closed after less than a year in operation. The final paragraph mentioned that she had relocated to Chicago, where she was starting over again, according to unnamed sources. What caught Dominic's attention wasn't Adrienne's business failure or relocation, but the article's brief mention that she had unsuccessfully attempted to publish a memoir about her marriage to cybersecurity mogul Dominic Foster, reportedly abandoned it after legal interventions. Dominic's expression remained impassive as he forwarded the article to Patricia with a single question. Our NDA enforcement? Patricia's reply came within minutes. Precisely. Our monitoring systems flagged the manuscript when she submitted it to publishers. Cease and desist letters were issued immediately. No breaches occurred. The system worked exactly as designed. Dominic closed the email without further response. Adrienne's attempt to monetize their failed marriage through a memoir was exactly the kind of retaliatory action his security protocols had been designed to prevent. The non-disclosure provisions in their divorce agreement had been implemented specifically for such scenarios. Her failure to circumvent these measures represented the final confirmation of his strategic victory, not just in neutralizing the immediate threat she and Sullivan had posed, but in establishing sustainable defenses against future attacks from that vector. As he returned to the balcony, Dominic felt no anger toward Adrienne, no lingering bitterness about her betrayal. Those emotional responses had been processed and filed away months ago, relevant data points incorporated into his recalibrated security architecture. What remained was simply operational awareness, the cold recognition of a neutralized threat that no longer required active attention. Eleanor glanced up from her laptop as he passed the office doorway. Everything all right? Yes, Dominic replied truthfully. Just confirmed that a particular security protocol is functioning as designed. She nodded, understanding without requiring elaboration. Another aspect of their compatibility that enhanced rather than compromised his operational effectiveness. Standing at the balcony railing, Dominic surveyed the city below. The buildings where Foster Security's systems protected valuable information. The streets where people moved through their lives unaware of the invisible architecture that safeguarded their digital existence. His work had always been about protection, identifying vulnerabilities, neutralizing threats, securing assets against exploitation. The betrayal by Adrienne and Sullivan had simply expanded his understanding of which assets required protection and which vulnerabilities demanded attention. The breach had been painful, but ultimately instructive. The response had been measured, but comprehensive. The reconfigured system was stronger, more resilient, more sophisticated than its predecessor. Dominic Foster had survived betrayal not by becoming impenetrable, but by becoming more strategically selective about where and how to permit access. His capacity for calculated trust remained intact. Not the blind faith that enabled exploitation, but the calibrated openness that facilitated productive connection while maintaining necessary defenses. As the city lights shimmered below, Dominic acknowledged the fundamental truth that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. True security wasn't the absence of vulnerability, but its intelligent management. The elimination of risk required the elimination of opportunity. The optimal strategy was not impenetrable isolation, but strategic integration. Systems configured to maximize productive connection while minimizing exploitative breach. For a man whose life had been dedicated to security protocols, this recalibrated understanding represented the most valuable asset recovery possible. Not just the protection of his company and reputation, but the preservation of his capacity for strategic connection despite the betrayal that had threatened to destroy it. The system hadn't just been repaired. It had been enhanced, reconfigured, optimized. And that, Dominic reflected as he turned away from the view to rejoin Eleanor, was the most complete victory possible over those who had intended his destruction. And there you have it, another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.